In order that we have our minds in the right place with our Father in heaven and his Son, we call upon our brother Greg Hurn to deliver his words of exhortation this morning. He went and departed into a desert place, and there he prayed. Brother Greg.
Brother Axel, my dearly beloved brothers and sisters in our Lord Jesus Christ. It's my intention this morning to look at some of the prayers of Jesus and some of the things he said about prayer. Now, of course, this is a very large subject. Don't intend to cover it all this morning. We'll continue it in a later exhortation. It's rather interesting with the New Testament that the New Testament commences with a prayer's answer and ends with a prayer. In Luke chapter 1, we read about Zacharias. Although that's not the first book of the New Testament, this is the first incident of the New Testament. And we have the situation where Zacharias, the priest, goes into the temple and he's met there by an angel. And the angel says to him in verse 13, "Fear not, Zacharias, for thy prayer is heard. And thy wife Elizabeth shall bear thee a son and shall call his name John." Earlier on we'd heard about these people in verse 6 that they were both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments and ordinances of Yahweh blameless. And then we find out that Elizabeth was barren and Zacharias goes into the temple. Now, of course, with the book of Revelation, it finishes with a prayer, doesn't it? The words of John, "Even so, come, Lord Jesus." And so the New Testament starts with the fulfilment or the fulfilling of a prayer, the answering of a prayer. The prayer had been answered for a long time, but not in the way in which John and Elizabeth had thought it would be. And in a sense, we gain an insight into the intimacy of their life, don't we? Their innermost thoughts. And we have this couple that are now well advanced in age. And they've been praying for a long time. Were they still praying? One would think not. One would think that they had, that the prayer was from a long time before. Would they expect in their older years that they could still have a child when they hadn't had a child for so many years before? And we get an insight into the anguish, the stress, the tension that would have been in their marriage, in their home, as Elizabeth was not able to do what happened so easily for so many other people. And they prayed to God, and they prayed to God, they prayed to God. I would presume they've stopped praying by now. But God stored up their prayer and he's got an answer. And the point was that it was an answer in his time, in his will, and for his purpose. It wasn't just to satisfy the needs and the desires of this faithful couple. And we're told they're a faithful couple. And God has allowed them throughout most of their life to go through their life without having that child, without having the satisfaction, without having the joy, the pitter-patter of little feet, without the fulfilment of bringing up a child in their family. And you can imagine the tears that would have been shed over the years. But now the angel comes and Zacharias, and he's astonished, afraid. What's going on? What's this man doing in the temple here? I've come to answer your prayer at a time when it was unexpected and unanticipated, but something that was going to be in the wonderful plan and purpose of God. They were going to bear a child that was going to grow up and go forth as a voice before the Messiah, the one who would preach the coming of the Lord. And how much more than just a child this was going to be. He wasn't just going to be any man, any boy and any man. This was a specially chosen vessel that God was going to provide through this couple who had maintained their faithfulness throughout their life. Prayer was an integral part of the life of Jesus. and I think I need to preface my remarks this morning to say, I don't come before you as an expert in prayer this morning. We're going to stand together at the feet of the Master, maybe sit at the feet of the Master and learn from him, learn about what he says about prayer and learn from his own words. And it's interesting because his actual prayers aren't recorded very much. There's not a lot of recordings of his prayers. There are several. Some of them are short, pithy things. Some of them in the anguish of the cross. Some of them as he's hanging there at the absolute pinnacle of his life, but the pinnacle of his suffering also. There's prayers such as John chapter 17. The whole of the chapter is a prayer and seems to defy, in a sense, what he talks about prayers being short. He goes out into mountains and desolate places and spends the whole night in prayer. And so we're going to learn from him and try and gain insights into what he did and what he said, that we might learn to draw closer to our God in the way in which he did. In Mark chapter 1, we have an incident in Capernaum, early on in the ministry of Christ. Mark chapter 1 and verses 29 to 34. And we find that he'd healed a mentally unstable man in the synagogue. He goes home and Simon Peter's mother is sick. He heals her. It's a Sabbath day. And in verse 29 downwards, he came to the house of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother lay sick of a fever, and they tell him of her. He goes and he cures her. And it's interesting, the idea of the immediacy of his miracles. And immediately she got up and went and started working in the kitchen and doing things and serving and helping and so forth, providing for their needs. The immediacy of it. It was never... Most medicine that we are subject to today is something where you at best see a gradual improvement. You wait for things to happen, wait for healing, wait for some condition to improve, you look for signs of improvement. It's very, very rare to have something immediate. But in verse 32, and at even when the sun did set, they brought unto him all that were diseased, and them that were possessed with devils, and other versions put demons, and of course we know it's referring to people who were mentally ill. And all the city was gathered together at the door. All the city, this is Capernaum, on the edge of the Galilee. The sun's set and darkness has come upon the alleyways of Capernaum, and the houses will be closely set with narrow alleyways. And outside the door of Simon Peter's house, in the alleyway, it starts to clog up with people that have come there to try to get healed, try and see if Jesus can do anything for their condition. There'd be lanterns, maybe candles and so forth, as people try to dispel the darkness. But picture the scene. It's like an emergency department in a hospital, except probably much worse than what we have today, because people sit down in chairs mostly. But here are people in all sorts of distressing situations and conditions. People with broken bodies, people with all sorts of foul diseases, people with mental illnesses, and shouting out in a way that we find uncomfortable because of the way in which they say things and that are perhaps not socially acceptable at the time. And Jesus moves through this crowd of people. And we need to understand that this would be a very disquieting thing for him. We know he had a sensitive spirit, and he would look upon all these people that were anxiously waiting to try and get help from him. And you see all these sick people and the commotion and the kerfuffle, possibly people shoving and pushing to try and get seen first. Who knows when he's going to run out, when he's going to stop, and he's going to say, that's enough for today, it's in the evening. And he moves through the crowd, he stops at people, he heals them. And they're healed straight away in a way in which they had barely had opportunity to even hope could possibly happen, and their pain, their suffering has gone away. People who are chronically sick that had no expectation other than to die from their illnesses. He stops and he gives a word, an appropriate word. He never just healed anyone. Recall the time when the woman with the discharge for so many years came and touched him. And he was in a crowd of people who were pressing it upon him. And he says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples said, "Are you out of your mind? Everyone's touching you." He said, "No, someone touched me to be healed." There was something that happened with him. It cost him personally every time there was a healing. But he didn't just allow the woman to go away healed. He wanted to talk to her. And he always did this. He healed people and he talked to them. He wanted to encourage their faith. He wanted to help them to repent, help them to come closer to God. And behind him is this scene of calmness of people who've been healed, and they're possibly melting away into the shadows as they go down the alley to their homes with unexpected joy. And in front of him is this scene of chaos. And he goes through the whole crowd. And the tears of anguish morphed into a quiet sense of calm. The unbelievable. Who could believe what they'd seen happen? And I'm sure that there are other people there other than the families of those who were diseased and ill. People would come to watch what's happening. Wow, word would spread. So what's happening? And in the narrow alleyway, people was down the alleyway further, trying to see, trying to get a view of what was happening. And as people left, they didn't have TV reporters and so forth, newspaper reporters, but people say, "What was wrong with you? You look pretty fine to me. What happened to you?" "Oh, I had such a condition." And of course, Jesus didn't even have to diagnose people. He was able to heal people, whatever their disease or their illness was. The gathering of so many people, sufferers, would have affected his tender spirit. And he would have felt for those under the course of mortality. But then, eventually, the alleyway is deserted. Darkness and quiet settle upon it. And you think, well, what's he going to do? What's he going to do now? Probably late at night. It's taken time. It's taken something out of him. He's exhausted. All right, well, he goes to bed. In verse 35, and in the morning, rising up a great while before day. So he's gone to bed, probably late at night. And I must admit, if it had been me, I would have thought, "Oh, good job. Right, I get to sleep in the morning. Right, that was pretty successful last night. That was good. Right, I just have a good rest in the morning to recover from what it took out of me." But we see that Jesus was different. He was different. He knew where his strength came from. He knew where his capacity to cope with the terrible things that he'd seen and the beautiful rejuvenation and healing that he'd been part of. And so in verse 35 he says, "And in the morning, rising up a great while before day." Now, he was living in the house of fishermen, and one would expect that they would be used to either working at night time or certainly getting up in the very early hours before dawn. He gets up before any of them. They don't even know where he goes. No one sees him, and he just quietly slips out the door. And he goes out of the whole. He goes away from the town. He goes into a desolate place. And he went out and departed into a solitary place, and there prayed. He needed spiritual rejuvenation. He prays to God in a solitary place. He's going to a place by himself, away from the crowds, even away from his disciples, away from everyone that knew him. Now, of course, this isn't always possible for us to do such a thing. And as I said, we're coming to Jesus to learn what he did, to look at what he did, to learn of him. And, of course, if I was to suggest to busy young mothers that they go and find themselves a nice quiet solitude in a desolate place, and they sort of laugh at me, I'm sure, and say, "You're kidding." I remember my daughter saying they're lucky, usually can't even go to the toilet by themselves. Kids are always around and want them and want attention and everything else. So the idea of this would be an extreme luxury, obviously. But we're looking at the ideas of what Jesus found that worked for him. studies in recent times have shown that going out into nature is actually a very beneficial thing for people. They've done studies and they found that often people with depression and some forms of mental illness gain as much benefit from going out into a natural environment for a couple of hours a week as they do from the pills that they take and the drugs and medicines they take. And going out into nature to watch the trees bending in the wind, perhaps on the seashore and seeing the endless waves, it does something in our minds that helps us to draw closer to God, to understand ourselves in the big picture in a sense, and gives us a calmness and a quietness. And Jesus was doing this. It's a huge challenge in our busy lives today. It's amazing. If you go back 100 years, housewives would spend a whole day trying to do some washing, cooking and cleaning and everything. It was just a never-ending job. We have so many labour-saving devices nowadays. We can go long distances very quickly. It's not a matter of having to walk or get on a horse or a cart and spend a huge amount of time going in. We can achieve so much. But of course what we do is we fill our lives with more things. We want this high standard of living and we want to achieve more, we want to do things. So how to take time out? And yet we have to try to do that in some way or another. You know, the world closes in on us. And so many people nowadays, you come home from work and you've got a mobile phone. The government's even tried to take action on this, trying to protect people from the advances of the workplace into the home environment, where even late at night someone wants to give you a call and talk about your business and your work. Maybe it's just in the garden, if you're fortunate to have a garden. And you go there and just pottering around with the plants and holding a hose gives you time to think and to absorb nature as well. Thinking is so important, and we have to try to extract ourselves from the noise of modern life and the non-stop entertainment. You know, what with our mobile phones and other devices and so forth, there is always something to attract our interest. You wake up in the morning, that's if you haven't been on your phone during the night looking at things. Wake up in the morning, it's all there ready for you to go. The world takes our attention, and I'm no different from anyone else. I get involved and so forth with things. What Jesus is saying is take time out for God. It wasn't that he had to go and tell God what had happened. God knew. It wasn't that he had to go and ask God to show that he was with him. He knew God was with him. He'd seen all these people that were so desperately ill, and they walked away whole and hearty, better than any doctor could ever do. He knew God was with him, but he went to commune with God. He went to spend time focusing upon God. And of course, what he's teaching us is that the way to overcome sin is through positive association with God. We will never overcome sin in our lives if we're just negative. Oh, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do this. So what was it I'm not going to do? Oh, right, that's a pretty good idea. You never, Jesus tells the parable of the man. He said he had a demon and he cast him out and had a nice empty space there, but he didn't fill it in with anything. And 7 more demons, worse than the first one, came along and filled the space. What Jesus was doing was filling his life with a connection and an association and a focusing upon God. And in prostrating himself in the desolate place, as he communed with God, and he was refreshed in a way that enabled him to have the strength and the courage to face the next day that was coming. Back in Capernaum, everyone's coming back, and people that weren't there the night before, everyone's come to the door, and Peter, I don't know where he is even. And they went searching for him. They eventually searched outside of the town, and you can imagine the moment when, you know what it's like when you're searching for someone that's lost? Well, Jesus wasn't lost, but they didn't know that. Maybe he just wandered out and walked in the night. Where'd he gone? What's happened? The whole town wants him. Surely, you have to be there to answer the questions from all the reporters and so forth. And Peter, and coming around a corner perhaps, they see Jesus prostrate on the ground, calm, communing with God. And they learnt a lesson that would stay with them the rest of their life. This was the source of Jesus' graciousness. This was the source of his calmness in dealing with things. This was the source of how he dealt with problems in life. And it came from his communion and his association with God. Jesus tells us that we need to make our prayers short. And many of the recorded prayers of Jesus were short, succinct and to the point. But then at other times he spent endless hours in communion with God, sometimes all through the night. And I don't understand how he could do that. I'd go to sleep. I have had my sleepless nights spent in prayer to God. You have problems that you don't have the answers to. You tried everything you can, and you eventually turn to God and say, God, it's in your hands, however you want it to be. But Jesus regularly does that. He spends these hours, long hours, through the night, focusing on Yahweh so that he's not eventually distracted by the temptations that arose. And what we need to be careful of is that we never need to, we want to make sure that we don't think that Jesus was Mr. Teflon. You know, the Teflon in the pans, you put grease and stuff in there and it all just washes out easily, comes easily, doesn't stick to it. It wasn't like that for Jesus. Jesus struggled with temptations. Jesus battled against the problems that occurred, tried to work his way through it. And as we come to the cross itself, we see the anguish that he faced and so forth. But the strength that he used to face these things came from his communion with God. He constantly worked on strengthening the bond between himself and his Father, and he goes back time and again to the long sessions of communion with God. In John chapter 11, and this is out of sequence in the sense of the time, but it gives us an insight into Jesus' mind as well. At the resurrection of Lazarus, in John chapter 11 and verse 41 and 42. And I'm sure this applied early on in his ministry as well. In John 11 verse 41 and 42. They took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, now here's a prayer. Here's a prayer as Jesus, as I said, we don't have a lot of the prayers of Jesus recorded. Just a short, pithy thing here, and it's quite possible that he said it out loud. Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. Lazarus hasn't come out of the tomb yet. Lazarus is still bound in the tomb in the death clothes. He says, Father, I thank that you've heard me. I knew that thou hearest me always. Now, when he's healing the people in Capernaum years before this event, he knew that God was hearing him. He knew that God was using him as an instrument for God's will. The power that was seen at his hands did not come from him. They came from Almighty God. And he goes on and he says, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. So he said, look, I've said this prayer to you, I've said it out loud, that people might understand that what I'm doing is not coming from me, but it's coming from you. It's your power, it's your will. And I thank you that you've heard me. And so when, going back into the time of Capernaum, he was there and he knew that God was hearing him, that God was working through him. Now, it also is a problem often that when good things happen in our life, we're not so worried about our connection to God. When there's troubles, when there's problems, when there's issues, when there's anxiety, it's much easier to turn to God and please God help me, please God sort it out. Maybe a mess that I've made myself, but can you just happen to unravel it all and sort it out? But Jesus has had a night of triumph in which he's seen the effects of mortality temporarily dispelled. He's had a night in which people are acclaiming him. And he sleeps for a little while, and he gets up and he goes into the wilderness, and he bends down before his God, and he spends hours in that solitude in prayer. In Luke chapter 6, we're told that in the incident that led to the choosing of his 12 disciples, in Luke 6 verse 12 to 13, and it came to pass in those days that he went out into a mountain to pray and continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called unto him his disciples, and of them he chose 12, whom he also named apostles. He was about to do a momentous thing that was going to, in many senses, define the next 3 years of his life. He was going to choose his closest companions. He was going to choose those that were going to be there, that he was going to work on to try and prepare for the role of the one sent, for the apostles that were going to go out and take the message that he'd been given to the rest of the world. Here he is defining his heritage. It was going to depend largely, though not totally, because the Apostle Paul is called as one out of season and does in many senses the bulk of the work. But here he's forming the nucleus of the new ecclesia, the nucleus of his body. And he's going to choose 12 disciples. And what does he do the night before he does that? He goes into a mountain, once again to a solitary place, away from everyone, disciples and everyone following, and wasn't lots more people